friends. There's a golden rule in diplomacy with friends and partners. We're always going to argue. We're going to disagree on issues. That's normal. Behind the scenes, not in public view. Be respectful. We've had, I think, some unfortunate verbal sparring. I hope that can be countermanded now, that we won't see a repetition of that. And so this is a time, I hope, where the two governments can work with each other and work through these problems. I hope very much as a citizen, I'm out of the government, that we'll see a trade agreement between India and the United States. I hope very much that we'll be able to get back on the continuum that we were on to work together, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, where our militaries have been working very intensively together in the Bay of Bengal, in the Western Pacific. I hope we can continue the project of building the economic trade and investment relationship. We have so much in common, and the energy of the American private sector and the energy of the Indian American community is a natural bridge. All that's very important. Any trade agreement is going to be a function of an ultimate compromise of interests between the two parties. Well, I hope the Quad will continue to operate at the head of government level as well as at the foreign minister and defense ministers level. India, the US, Japan, and Australia are the critical countries that can have weight in the world, weight militarily in the South China Sea, East China Sea, the Pacific Ocean, the Taiwan Strait. We're talking about making sure that the democracies are strong, that we can deter further expansion of the People's Liberation Army. We've seen them probing against and testing the sovereignty of the Philippines and Vietnam, the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, contesting, the peace of the Taiwan Strait. So it's critical that the Quad continue.
Hello and welcome to USISPF Conversations, where we bring you riveting conversations with an eclectic mix of experts. And my guest today epitomizes that expertise. I am delighted to be joined by Ambassador Nicholas Burns right here in New Delhi, Vice Chairman of the Cohen Group, but most recently served as Ambassador to China under the Biden administration. So Ambassador, welcome. He's got a very impressive resume. It's exhaustive and the envy of so many people because he's a doyen in diplomacy, venerated in the halls of the State Department, Foggy Bottom, a resume that's phenomenal that serves 6 presidents, 9 secretaries of states over 3 decades. Career Foreign Service Officer, and you wore many hats. Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 to 2008, the State Department's 3rd ranking official. You led negotiation of the US-India civil nuclear deal, which we'll get into. A career that's seen you handle so many portfolios with Israel, with Iran, Ambassador to NATO, the only time the alliance did use Article 5, Ambassador to Greece, State Department spokesperson. We could go on and on and on, but I'm just delighted to be able to pick up from where we left off when we started this conversation. 2005 is when you started coming up with the 123 civil nuclear agreement. And this is a phenomenal period because US-India relations went from aid to trade, estrangement to engagement. Not long ago, there was also the sanctions. So to go from sanctions to civil nuclear deal was epochal. So walk us down memory lane.
Well, I think it's right that we look back 20 years. And I'm in Delhi and I've been in Mumbai this week, and it's a real pleasure to be back in India. Because of COVID and because of my term in China, I had not been to India since 2019, 6 years. So I've had a great week talking to government leaders, parliamentary leaders, business leaders, average citizens here in Delhi and Mumbai. And this anniversary of this great turning point in the US-India relationship, that's what happened in the summer of 2005. I met this week with both Foreign Minister Jaishankar and with my good friend, Ambassador Sham Saran, who was Foreign Secretary at the time. And I think, we all agree on the US, those of us who were involved 20 years ago, that was the moment when we understood that we had to be strategic partners with each other, that as democracies, as countries that wanted to have a stable world order, with a lot of common views, that we had to work together and overcome the sanctions and the misunderstandings of the past before 2005. And so it's a proud moment to reflect on the civil nuclear agreement. It was important unto itself because it removed sanctions on India. It normalized our economic relationship. It allowed us to engage in the civil nuclear apparatus in India. But in a much larger sense, it was the key turning point in the entire history of the relationship because it put us on this path to strategic partnership.
It also overcame the hesitation of history, and talking to experts like yourself you lead into my next question as well. You worked with, back then you said Foreign Secretary Shamsaran, and later with Foreign Secretary Shiv Shankar Menon,
Yes.
and of course with Dr. Jaishankar, who needs little introduction, but back then was JS Americas. So it's hard to crystal ball gaze, but we saw how epochal this was both in your own careers and in the relationship. Because from then on, we had India designated the major defense partner 10 years later under the Obama administration. We had STA-1, we had the Quad coming back, Indus-X, ISET. But how did you see that India was going to be a strategic partner, even back then when people would have said the relationship was still hyphenated with Pakistan and AFPAC was very much going on and the war was still going on in Afghanistan? So how did you break away and said the US-India relationship is on its own?
You know, I think I was working obviously for Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and President George W. Bush at the time. And our assessment was, this is 2005, so, you know, we had gone through the horrors of 9/11. We had, with UN Security Council blessing, gone into Afghanistan to fight al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We were involved in the Iraq War. It was a very tense and critical time in US strategic history. And we reflected on the fact that the Indo-Pacific was going to be the most important region of the world. 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world are in the Indo-Pacific, including the United States, obviously. I would say the 4 strongest militaries in the world, the United States and India and China and Japan, are in the Indo-Pacific. So this part of the world was going to be the place where the future was going to be very much decided. And so we wanted a strategic partnership with this great country, with which we had had an off and on again relationship since 1947. It had been warm at the beginning. It had been very cold in the 1970s when the United States under President Nixon tilted toward Pakistan. Oh. And it was our view that the kind of world we wanted to see, with the world order intact, with the UN Declaration of Human Rights intact, with the rule of law intact, to make sure that we were in the ascendancy as democracies in this century, and that we had, while we wanted a peaceful relationship with China, certainly, we wanted to limit the expansion of Chinese power in the world. So that was very much part of the beginning of this relationship. And the major impediment was the fact that the United States had sanctioned India over its nuclear program from 1974 on, and that was the great stumbling block, and we decided we were going to remove it. It ultimately took 3 years. After our initial negotiations in 2005, I made 8 trips to India. Shamsaran and Shankar Menon, my 2 negotiating partners, we met all over the world. Shankar and I met in Madrid. Sham and I met in New York at the United Nations. They came to Washington. Of course, we were working very closely with Jaishankar. He was Joint Secretaries for the America. And you could see then how smart and capable and adept he was, and why he would eventually become foreign minister. And my 2 negotiating partners are lifelong friends. Sham has visited me at Harvard. Shankar has visited me at Harvard. We're in touch with each other. Sham even visited me twice when he visited Beijing, when I was ambassador there over the last 3.5 years. So it really spawned a set of relationships, strategic between the governments, but also a set of personal relationships. If you think of Manmohan Singh with George W. Bush and Barack Obama, or the relationship that Prime Minister Modi has had with a succession with 3 different US presidents, these are very important for a relationship among strategic partners and friends, and we are certainly that with India.
I just love that what you just said, because that segues very beautifully into my next question, because in 1970s, when Nixon Kissinger opened up to China and India first tested nuclear weapons in Operation Smiling Buddha in 74, the relationship was nadir. No one could have foreseen this, because the first 50 years of India's history, only 3 presidents came to India: Eisenhower, Nixon, and Carter. Yeah. And since Clinton 2.0, every president has come, and we've spoken about how it's truly politically agnostic and truly bipartisan. You've had every permutation combination of BJP, Congress, Democrat, Republican that left the relationship better. But of course, there's perhaps a question in New Delhi right now under economic tariffs. Is that changing, or do you see this as a blip in the road?
I think we're at a challenging time now in the relationship because we do have this major disagreement over tariffs. We've had, I think, some unfortunate verbal sparring, mainly initiated by some of the Trump officials,
Of course.
which I think are very unfortunate among friends. There's a golden rule in diplomacy with friends and partners. We're always going to argue. We're going to disagree on issues. That's normal. Behind the scenes, not in public view. Be respectful. I hope that can be countermanded now, that we won't see a repetition of that. And some major disagreements, for instance, over the war in Ukraine. And so this is a time, I hope, where the two governments can be calm and work with each other and work through these problems. I hope very much as a citizen now, I'm out of the government, that we'll see a trade agreement between India and the United States. I hope very much that we'll be able to get back on the continuum that we were on to work together, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, where our militaries have been working very intensively together in the Bay of Bengal, in the Western Pacific. I hope we can continue the project of building the economic trade and investment relationship. We have so much in common, and the energy of the American private sector and the energy of the Indian American community is a natural bridge. All that's very important. On trade, I'd say this. Any trade agreement is going to be a function of an ultimate compromise of interests between the two parties. And I can't speak for the Indian side, obviously, and while I'm not in the government, I do understand why, in two respects, President Trump is concerned that there be movement on the Indian side. Number one is the fact that India, in some ways, has been for decades now, if not a half a century, a closed market to American goods. And we want to bring down the barriers to trade to expand the relationship. Second, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is in many ways an existential issue for the United States. We don't want to see Russia violate the most sacred rule in international politics. You can't cross someone else's border and try to take over the country, and in this case destroy the country and subsume it into a greater Russia. And look at the price that the Ukrainian people have paid because of this terrible assault by the Russian military over the last 3.5 years. In the United States, we feel this problem acutely, this war acutely, because Europe's our largest trade partner. Europe's the largest investor in our economy, and the greatest number of American treaty allies in the world are in NATO. So if Putin succeeds, he will divide Europe. The eastern half of Europe will be unfree. He will be authoritarian in the model of Putin and the Kremlin itself. We can't allow that to happen. So I hope that India will find a way to diminish its trade in oil with the Russian Federation, if not eliminate it altogether. I think that's a very important point. I'm not part of these negotiations, but there is always two sides to a negotiation. I've been here in India now for the better part of a week, and I've heard the Indian side, and I know that India has some legitimate concerns, but the United States has legitimate concerns as well. So I think that's the way to look at this, and that we hope that the professionalism of the negotiators will find a way through, and we'll be able to put aside this very unfortunate period that we've had over the last couple of months. I've heard from a lot of Indians this week about the anger they have towards the United States, about the fact that they think that somehow we are acting to change the entire history of their relationship. I think there's strong support in the Congress, and I hope there's going to be strong support in the Trump administration for this relationship. And I'd say two other things. I don't personally, as a citizen, agree with this policy of expansive tariffs. I think that they are self-defeating. They're not economically wise. Most economists would say they place a tax on citizens, the consumer, and that won't be good for the American people. They also depress trade at a time when we want to expand global trade. So that's point one. But I also think it's important that the United States recognize the strategic importance of India to our country. I felt this acutely as the American ambassador to China. We all want to live in peace with China. There are times when we can cooperate with China on climate change, for instance, but China is pushing out. The PLA is pushing out in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait, in the Yellow Sea, and certainly pushing out along India's border, several thousand kilometers of the border in the Himalayas with India. And we need the United States to be a good friend and a good ally of India. And we need to stand with India when its interests and our interests coincide. And so I think that's more important than the tariffs. And a more effective policy would be for the United States to remember what has united India and the United States for the better part of the last 25 years. I actually think the American outreach to India, the normalization of our relationship, the fact that we've come together as military partners, as diplomatic partners, as friends, people to people, I think it's one of the most important achievements of the United States in its foreign policy in the last 25 years. And the great thing is, and you mentioned this, it's a bipartisan triumph. That every Republican administration, every Democratic administration has agreed with it. So that's what's at stake right now. And I think preserving this relationship and being true to it is important for the United States as it is for India.
There's a very important part of the strategic partnership. We talk about shared democratic values, shared commercial relations, of course the diaspora, but I like to say the elephant in the room is the dragon, the China factor, a country you know very well, served in, familiar for it for many years. You've seen the evolution of China. Some would say that given the current splintering of relations, it sort of adds to China's benefits. So how would, say, Mr. Xi and Mr. Wang Yi be reading the tea leaves, no pun intended?
Oh, I think that the Chinese leadership is looking at this period of disagreement between the U.S. and India with a lot of glee. They want to take advantage of this. They certainly would like to drive a wedge between India and the United States. They're trying to drive a wedge between the United States and our European allies, and a wedge between the United States and Japan and the United States and South Korea. So the Chinese, I think, see this as opportunistic. And we can't let them do that to this relationship that we've built up, with such energy and such conviction between India and the United States. Because we do want to live in peace with China. We both want to trade with China. There are times when our interests dictate we work with China. But China wants to become the strongest power in the Indo-Pacific. That is not in the interest of India and not in the interest of the United States. I'll explain it this way. One of the things we told ourselves and said publicly back in 2005, 6, 7, and 8 was that the rise of India as a strategic power in the world was in the interest of the United States.
Absolutely.
I still believe that to be true. That our destinies as countries are to be together. We're not allies. India and the United States have different traditions. We don't always agree on issues. We disagree on Russia, for instance,
of course,
and the Ukraine war. We wish India would be more vigorous in opposing that war. But still, what's important is that our vital national interests are intertwined and that we've been working together. We cannot lose that. We have to keep that relationship going forward. And so I hope the Trump administration will come to understand and see and state publicly that continuing this strategic relationship is the most important thing. And, we'll have a trade agreement, but we should not have 50% tariffs on India. And we should not let any disagreement on trade overwhelm the rest of the relationship. I think that's what's at stake right now.
You've seen Trump 1.0, and a lot has changed in Trump 1.0, particularly a pandemic, and but some has remained the same. Trump 1.0 also spoke about tariffs as an economic instrument, a foreign policy instrument, but in Trump 2.0, the tariffs seem to be even on allies, and economists are going to talk about the knock-on effects it's going to have right now, and you touched on that a little bit. Is it fair to say that the political domestic tirade is precluding an economic strategic partnership? Because strategic partnership thinks about what we can cut back for the greater good of America's role in the world, about the Indo-Pacific, of what we need with shared democratic partners.
Well, I'd answer your question this way. When I left Beijing, I returned to Massachusetts, where my wife and I live, and began unpacking my bags. And The Economist magazine sent me an email and said, would you write an article for us? And the article should be about what did you learn in China as ambassador? What were your takeaways? I wrote that article and published it in mid-February. And the key takeaway was, I think, entitled, Be Nice to Your Friends. Respect your friends and allies. Work with them. because they are the difference maker in the relationship between the U.S. and China. If you compare the power of both countries, U.S. and China, along several matrices, military power, technology power, diplomatic influence in the world, economic weight, human rights, soft power, the U.S. and China are pretty close. The Chinese would always say to me, "Oh, you're more powerful than we are. We're a poor developing country," they'd say, which they really aren't. But we're pretty close. But if you add to our side of the ledger, our relationship with India, our military alliances with South Korea and Japan and Thailand and Australia, and our defense agreements with New Zealand and Singapore, and then the fact that we're working strategically with NATO and the European Union in the Far East in terms of support for Taiwan, then the United States and its allies far outweigh China in total power. And so the key to restraining China and preventing China from trying to seek to be a hegemon in the Indo-Pacific is for the U.S. to stay very close to its allies. And I worry that the administration is drifting very far from that. You also have to show respect. You can't question the sovereignty of Canada or the sovereignty of Denmark and Greenland. And again, if you have arguments, and we're going to have arguments, do them quietly. Understand that every other country has politics too, and has domestic political concerns that they as leaders have to meet. These are fundamental rules of diplomacy that have been around for a couple of thousand years, but they're really important that we understand them, that we embrace them, and that they be our guide in these very difficult times.
Apocryphally attributed to Voltaire, I may disagree with what you have to say, but I'll defend your right to say it. Ambassador, I want to again talk about China, because it's a very funny, fateful triangle, as the book by Tanvi Madan says, how China played a part in US-India relations. You mentioned something very interesting recently. You said we're both structural rivals, no matter who's in the White House or no matter who's in the Zhongnanhai. And since the Kissinger era and the on China, and since Clinton 2.0, where China got in the WTO, and it was believed that economic freedom would lead to political freedoms. That's not been the case right now with China. But since the last decade or so, since Xi Jinping has come into the forefront, have you seen Beijing move away from the Deng Xiaoping creed of hide your strength, bide your time? Is it all iron hand, no velvet glove?
They've definitely moved away from Deng Xiaoping's very acute strategic insight that China should hide its light and bide its time. I think under President Xi, China has decided that it wants to build its power in the world. It wants to reassemble what they think is historic China, say the Ming Dynasty. That's why they're so focused on Taiwan after having recovered both Macau and Hong Kong. And, we have interest too. So where's the competition? Why are we structural rivals? Well, China wants to become the dominant military power in the Indo-Pacific. We're competing with, and we're going to compete with them to prevent that from happening. The U.S. Navy and Air Force, our military, our treaty alliances, we think are the best guarantor of a stable Indo-Pacific. We're competing on a whole slew of technologies, technological transformations, and I think that's the center stage of the relationship. Artificial intelligence, who's going to be the first mover, first adapter, certainly biotechnology, quantum computing. There's competition in the cyber realm. China's been an extraordinarily negative and irresponsible aggressor in the cyber realm of the United States, and we've been very public about that. We're competing on trade and investment because we're the two largest economies. And of course, we have very different views of the rights of individuals, of human rights. We believe in human freedom.
Of course.
The Chinese Communist Party does not believe in human freedom. And so that's why I think we're structural rivals. Both of us want to be number one in each of these realms and in total power. And, I love my country. I think that despite our imperfections, and we're showing some of them in terms of our domestic discord and divisions these days, but we're a great country. And our values, I think, are values that other countries should want a world leader to have, and those aren't the values of the Chinese Communist Party. That's why we're structural rivals. Now, what we told ourselves in the Biden administration is we're going to compete, but we have to manage the competition in such a way that it doesn't end up in a conflict.
Absolutely.
And it drives down the probability of a conflict. That's very important. And so this is a very complicated, challenging, often contentious relationship between the two governments. I certainly felt that as ambassador. It was a difficult job, but obviously an important one given the size and strength of both of these competing powers.
Yeah, I definitely want to get your perspective on soft power, but it's fascinating because in 2017 I was in Singapore as a journalist and I segued to living in your state of Massachusetts. So in some ways I left Florence during the Renaissance because
You became a Red Sox fan?
I did. Red
Good.
Sox Nation.
That's important.
It's the only way to do it. I felt I left when the Indo-Pacific was coming back in the forefront from the 2004 Quad because back then Australia was a little bit reluctant when he was Prime Minister Rudd, fluent Sinophile. In 2017, I got a sense from the ASEAN nation of the belligerents in Indo-Pacific, Vietnam and Philippines, the Spratlys and the Paracels Islands. Again, it just felt like Beijing's belligerence brought back the Quad, which India, as you know, traditionally has been strategic autonomy. Back then, Indian diplomats would tell me, India and Quad prevents it looking anti-China, India and BRICS prevents it from looking anti-America. But you saw everyone just assert the free and open Indo-Pacific. So again, China's again moved away from the Sun Tzu's art of war thing, appear strong when you're weak and weak when you're strong. It just seems the CCP and the PLA understanding that is just one way to do it.
Well, I hope the Quad will continue to operate at the head of government level as well as at the foreign minister and defense minister's level, because those four countries, India, the US, Japan, and Australia, are the critical countries that can have weight in the world, weight militarily, in the South China Sea, East China Sea, the Pacific Ocean, the Taiwan Strait. We're talking about making sure that democracies are strong, that we can deter further expansion of the People's Liberation Army. We've seen them probing against and testing the sovereignty of the Philippines and Vietnam, the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, contesting, the peace of the Taiwan Strait. So it's critical that the Quad continue. I don't know when it will meet next. I think that maybe the trade agreement needs to be resolved first. I hope that will happen. I hope the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, can meet, because we have to continue this very important strategic relationship.
Yeah. Since on my penultimate question, you spoke about that fateful sunny day in September 2001 during 9/11 when your dear friend Condoleezza Rice, then NSA, and called you up and you spoke about that conversation about invoking Article 5. Your Canadian counterpart was the one who suggested it.
Yes.
And she said something I'll never forget. She said, it's good to have friends in the world. We've sort of moved away from multilateralism and sort of transactional diplomacy. As a career diplomat who has built friends and allies and connections all over the world, how do you perceive US foreign policy right now?
Well, I think that the United States does best when we work with our friends and allies around the world, our like-minded, democratic friends and allies around the world. If you think of it this way, Russia is surrounded by countries that fear it and fear being taken over by Russia. China has 14 neighbors and has border disputes with none of them, with many of them,
Exactly.
and is allied with none of them. The United States is so fortunate to have Mexico and Canada as our continental neighbors in North America, so fortunate to have the NATO alliance, to be at NATO on 9/11 representing the United States, and to see the European allies and Canada come to our defense after we were attacked in such a horrible way on 9/11. We lost so many people. It was a reassuring moment and a really hopeful moment. And I think one of the biggest takeaways of my career is that we do better when we work through allies. And so I do hope that the current administration in Washington, the Trump administration, will come back to what Truman and Eisenhower and JFK and Reagan and both Bushes and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Donald Trump in his first term practiced, and that would be a close association with our allies and partners. And India is a valued strategic partner. This is a relationship that we've got to nurture. We've got to work to move it forward, but we cannot let this relationship succumb to these disagreements over tariffs that are not as critical and as central as the strategic interests of our countries to preserve the peace in the Indo-Pacific. And so I can't think of anything more important right now than preserving the strength of this US-India relationship.
On a final note, we spoke a lot about hard power and Chinese power. Got to ask you about soft power. Fellow friend and academic Joe Nye, bless his soul wherever it is, codified soft power. And Singapore Foreign Minister Giorgio once said, to what you were saying, everyone wants the US as a friend, no one wants China as an enemy. The secret sauce of American foreign policy has been soft power. No matter the economic power, it's soft power. So talk us about what soft power means to you as a diplomat.
Joe Nye was a great man. I just went to his memorial service at Harvard University last week. And he was a friend and mentor to me in many ways during my academic time at Harvard. And Joe pioneered the concept that, sure, countries have military power, they have economic punching power, they have technological power, but countries also have an ability to influence through a combination of factors: the strength of their culture, the strength of their educational institutions, of their values especially. And, you know, despite the fact that the United States has not always been perfect, we do have a constitution that is historically one of the most important, if not the most important, ever written, that all men and women are created. Our Declaration of Independence are created equal, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights that gives us individual rights and freedoms that are the basis of a democratic country. And we're an immigrant society. All of us come from someplace else. I'm the grandson of Irish immigrants. I have a ton of friends who are sons and daughters of Indian immigrants or immigrants themselves. And these immigrant communities represent the motto of the country, e pluribus unum. Out of many people,
we're one.
Many faiths and ethnicities becomes one American people. And I do think that we share those values with India, and we do not share them with China. To me, that is an important comparison to make. And that means we've got to rise above the misunderstandings of the past few months, the unfortunate remarks, and reestablish this relationship for the future.
Thank you, Ambassador Burns, like a diplomat across the. Thank you.
Pleasure.